All right. Well, Mike Jacobson, VP of People Operations at Steno, what a pleasure it is to have you on the Modern Mentor podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here for so many reasons. We've known each other a long time. We found a way to connect in our professional lives all these years later, even though we knew each other in our childhood. And I couldn't be more excited to chat with you about a subject that makes me excited.
Oh, man, that is awesome. And for listeners, you should just know Mike is a friend of my little brother's from preschool, elementary school. I'm not really sure. So we have known each other for so many years and probably seen each other do many, many foolish things in the younger ones, hopefully less so in more recent years. But it is so fun to have this conversation with you now in this professional context. You have done some really impressive things with your career, and I'm excited to pick your brain and pull through some insights whenever you're ready.
Feeling mutual. Bring it on.
Awesome. So we talked about how we are doing these kind of miniature interviews, these 3-question interviews as an experiment on the podcast. And so, as you know, my first question to you is, what is something that you are excited about or proud of having achieved? Could be within your current organization, a past organization, but something you have delivered or developed or put out into the world that has helped your talent be more successful. And what can we learn from that?
I'm really proud of the learning and development environment motion that we've created in the company, because I think a lot of companies sort of like talk the talk on this subject, but they don't actually do a good job of encouraging and incentivizing people to spend the time to actually absorb the stuff that's in their LMS. You know, a lot of people think of it as like, I've got to do a compliance course and there's an information security training course, and I'm just going to click through and get to the end. And certainly we've got to do that as well. But while you're there, you should get some things that can help you boost your career, right? You've already got the captive audience because they're going in there for their compliance reasons, but give them a reason to stick around that is something more transactional than just getting paid for the job that they do. Give them another set of skills that they can use to make themselves more marketable, or to understand a part of the business that they don't have access to on a regular basis, or improve their lingo such that they can be more relatable to clients. There's lots of different things that we do. What we don't do is add a whole bunch of like third party, out of the box content into the LMS, because that would create a, why am I here listening to this person who doesn't know what it's like to work at this company type feeling. So that's one thing, is we've custom created a lot of content, most of the content that's there, to really give people a reason to stick around and to absorb. And we also add some carrots in there too, which are, points you can earn for completing courses that you can exchange for things like company swag that you can gift to your colleagues who did a really good job. And I think when you have both the incentive and the rewards tuned properly, you can get a lot of great results. For us, what we've seen is LMS activity equals a lot of career progression. It equals a lot of promotion. It equals a lot of people going from individual contributor to manager. And that's something that I'm really proud of. I myself did a career transition a long time ago. I was an attorney for 6 years out of law school, and I decided that it wasn't for me, and I became an HR professional instead. And I had to, do a lateral move and learn a whole entirely new industry. I'm proud that we've created that sort of environment where people are interested in making those types of career transitions or growing in the chain that they're in already.
That's awesome. Congratulations, Mike. And there are a couple of things I want to just quickly pull through there, and then I might ask you a clarifying question or two. First of all, in terms of your own journey, I think people are generally afraid of a lateral move. I think we feel like, nope, I'm on a path, I'm climbing a ladder, I've got to keep going up, up, up. I think it's very brave to take a leap out of the lane that you're in and step into a new one. And yet I assume that you've brought your legal background. Well, first of all, you're working in a legal organization, but even just having a legal background as an HR professional makes you stand out. It brings a different category of skills to the job. And so I would love for listeners to just be paying attention to the value of considering moves that are left and right and not always just straight up. I think there's something inspirational in there.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Do you want to tackle it one at a time, or do you? Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add on to that? That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's an identity crisis that goes along with these types of transitions for a lot of people, right? Especially for me. I think this is part of the reason that I struggled for as long as I did. I did 6 years of litigation. And while I had a different image in my mind of what was what a lawyer is going to be like versus what it was like in reality, I wasn't willing to give up on it so easily because I had made this large investment in time and money and my identity. I quite literally had to call my Nana up and say, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And she was like, what? Like my grandson doesn't want to be a lawyer? So I think that was part of it too, is to your point, taking a leap and giving up on the identity that you had built toward. Because for me, what could be scarier than continuing on a path that you knew was not where you wanted to be? That's what made the light bulb go on, is that I looked at what success looked like in that world and said to myself, that's not what my goal is. I get more fulfillment out of helping people. And when I did, postmortems of cases that were over, or, helping clients avoid getting sued to begin with, that's where I really started to feel like the fulfillment that made me feel good about myself when I put my head on the pillow at night. In order to get into a new field, though, I think this is one of the most important facts, is that you've got to be willing to take a step either to the side or even back in order to make that transition. Just because I had a legal background, to your point, does not mean I can jump into an equivalent job in the HR world and just hit the ground running. I had to take a step back in order to give myself the opportunity to take 2 steps forward in a different direction in the future. That was part of the leap of faith that I'm glad that I did. I can understand why people are, hesitant to do that, but it started me on a path that provided a lot more career fulfillment for me, which is the good outcome.
Absolutely. And linking it back to your first point around your learning management system and all the content that you're putting out there. I know, sometimes people are they are looking to climb a particular ladder. And so they're looking to build skills that are only kind of within their blinders, right? I want to be climbing in this direction. So I am only looking for classes or courses that can teach me the exact and literal skills that I need to climb up. What I take from your story is that there can be value in exploring content that teaches you skills maybe outside of the particular lane that you're already in. And it helps you kind of be more thoughtful, more expansive, maybe more creative in the job that you're already doing. And so I hope people take a lesson from, if your organization has content available, if they have a LinkedIn Learning license, even if not, there is the internet that is full of TED Talks and free webinars all over the place. I think there is so much value in learning. And I know for me in my world and with clients that I talk to, a lot of times the biggest obstacle, Mike, is people finding the time when they may block some time in their calendar to make learning time. And then another meeting comes up and that feels kind of more real or more important. And so learning always takes the back seat. And so before we get to my second official question, I just want to ask, do you have any advice for people for whom that is the issue? How do you create a discipline around doing learning on some sort of regular cadence and prioritizing it?
You have to find the time of day that works for you, to your point, where you can really be in the zone and try to absorb as much as possible without distractions. For me personally, that time of day is right after my kids leave for the bus and before the hustle and bustle of the day starts, which is typically 8 a.m. until like 9:30 or so. There's also some time at night, which is the same for me after the kids go to bed, but before I collapse. So I think, for each person, you've got to find what is the window of opportunity that you can have some peace and quiet to concentrate. That's part of it. The other part of it is what you were talking about before, which is what are the skills that you need to go where you want to go? I think that's the other part of the equation. The skills that you want are sort of, the ones that you know about that are within your reach, that are within your realm and your role. But if you have a different role in mind, and if you have a different career goal in mind, right? I want to be a project manager. I want to be in HR. I want to be a manager one day. There's different skills associated with each one of those paths. And I think in order to make yourself a strong candidate, to stand out among a crowd, which is often, hundreds of applicants, you've got to show the actions that you've taken to bring that interest to life, as opposed to saying, I'm interested in that. That seems interesting. You've got to make something happen.
Yeah, all fair. So let's shift to my second question. I'd love to hear from you with a little bit of just candor and vulnerability. What is something that maybe you're curious about or noodling on or challenged by in terms of the talent experience in your organization? I wonder if I can potentially offer an insight or two.
We're big on feedback in Steno, and we go so far as to make it clear to managers the type of feedback that we want them to give to their direct reports. And for us, it really comes down to 2 different vectors of feedback. One is the tactical feedback that you would give based on the work that you observe on a day-to-day basis. And the other is there's the strategic feedback that you need to give to let somebody know how their career is progressing and where they stand within the role that they're in now and what opportunities they might have to earn more money or more opportunities in the future. Because of how different those two things are, the cadence is really important of how often you do them. And the mindset that the person is in when they hear it is important too. So what I struggle with and what I would always love to get some advice on is like, how regimented should that be versus how much safe or free space rather managers should have to come up with what works best for them and for their teams. For us right now, we're sort of at one end of the spectrum, which is managers do it their own way. And we've gotten very good at that because each manager has a different context and our teams are fully remote and they come up with the cadence that works best for them and for their teams. What gets lost in that, though, is that not everyone's doing it on the same schedule, and therefore we don't have like a pool of feedback data results to look at in any one moment. It's sort of like a revolving cycle, if you will.
Wow. Okay. That's a big, juicy.
I didn't give you an easy one. I'm giving you a hard one.
Great. So good. Let's brainstorm on this a little bit because I do think both the giving and the receiving of feedback are not always easy. I think these are things that organizations and people, individuals, are challenged by. You know, I talk to leaders who have some of these same questions. How do I do it? How often do I do it? I talk to employees who have questions like, how do I get better at receiving it? How do I give it to my peers? How do I give it to my boss? Like, there are a lot of questions around feedback, and we know what an important element of the workplace it is and of improving and growing over time. Just a couple thoughts off the cuff when it comes to feedback. I think first and foremost, before getting into cadence, is really focusing on quality and capability when it comes to giving feedback. I know back in the day when I used to be an HR person and I would run my business partners through talent assessments at the end of the year, I used to hear a lot of feedback that kind of had a lot of buzzwords and nothing particularly crystal clear about it. I used to hear a lot about this person really needs to be more of a strategic thinker. But when I would press the leader on that, what does that mean? How does one know when one is doing strategic thinking? And so, you know, something that I love working with organizations on is just helping to bump up their feedback giving skills. There's a model. I don't know if you're familiar with the SBI model, the Situation Behavior Impact model. That one is my favorite, where I tell a leader or a peer, if you're giving a piece of feedback to a colleague, when you're giving a piece of feedback, talk about the situation first. So simply, what were the facts of the situation? What did you observe? What did you witness? Then offer a particular behavior that was good or bad. So not, I would have loved for you to be more of a strategic thinker in that conversation, because that's not helpful. We need to focus on observable behaviors. So something like, you know, I noticed that while the client was talking, you were simply getting ready to say whatever you were going to say next, and it felt like you weren't listening. And when you listen and reflect back to the client what you heard, that shows them that you're really engaging, you're really paying attention, you're really a part of building the solution. And the impact there is that when we don't actively listen, we're telling the client that we're less interested in what they have to say, and we're more likely to not win that business, right? So I love to spend time with leaders making sure they're giving feedback that is really clear and actionable. And that obviously speaks to more of the tactical side of things. And I don't generally tell managers that there's a particular like number of pieces that you need to give, but really building a practice for themselves around both critical and positive, so that their employees regularly have a sense of how they're performing on a day-to-day basis. Let me just pause there, get a reaction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I think you're exactly describing what good tactical feedback sounds like. And to your point, depending on the person, depending on the team, depending on the situation, how often they get it is really a function of how often they need to hear it, right? You might do it in your weekly one-to-one. You might do it right after you hung up from a client call that you observed, so that it's timely, so that it's fresh in their mind. What you don't want to do is do it too infrequently, because it's not going to seem as actionable. You give me feedback about the thing that happened 3 weeks ago, and you don't want to be non-specific, which is what you said before, because then there's no anecdote that comes to mind where they could say, okay, with that feedback, how might I have done that differently? So the tactical, I think, is really important, both on the detail, the anecdotes, and also on the timing. The strategic really needs to be a reflection of that, right? Like based on all the tactical feedback that I've given you, my strategic feedback, and you don't have to phrase it that way, but once a month, once a quarter, once every half year, I'm noticing that when I give you feedback, you decline in your performance after that. Or that when I give you critical feedback, then you don't speak up as often after that. Or that you tend to get bogged down in the details of a project, and that tends to make you seem sort of like exhausted. And what I would want to see next quarter is you getting a little bit more proactive with the project plan to avoid those burnout moments, in advance. That's different. That's not specific anecdote. That's like, here's my 30,000 foot view of all the work that you've done and all the feedback that I've given you and how you've responded since then.
Yes, I think that's right. I think you're talking about just sort of broader, more global observations. And I think what's important, the one thing I'll say here is that I think it's important that the leader have a perspective on that person's ambitions or aspirations, right? Because you can give somebody feedback and say, based on what I'm noticing, looking at these trends, I don't know that you're going to be on track for a promotion. And the person might be sitting there thinking, I never said I wanted a promotion. I'm actually really comfortable in this role. Or, I want to continue expanding in this role, or I want to stay in this role, but, tackle clients in a different industry, or I'm actually interested in making a career move into a different part of the organization. And so I think the biggest opportunity for managers that I see in this space is having more conversations that are grounded in questions about somebody's ambitions. And I would say if you are a leader in an organization, make sure you are doing that regularly with your team members. And if you are a citizen and individual contributor, make sure that you're making your aspirations known and you're advocating for yourself in terms of what you want as well as what you don't want.
Couldn't agree more. I think a good metaphor that comes to mind for me is like taking care of a plant. If you were a passive manager, all you would really do is water the plant from time to time and make sure it gets sunlight. And what would happen, in effect, is the plant would be limited by its own capability and would sort of stay within that growth range because that's all it knows what to do. Your job as a manager is to add the fertilizer and to take care of the plant and put it in an environment where it can flourish. And that means giving it fertilizer, which is the feedback, right? To tell it, to your point, what is your perspective on what the person needs to do better to get where they want to go in their career? Without that, they're going to stagnate. And this is where the quote, people don't quit their company, they quit their managers, come to mind. If I'm not getting what I need from my manager to grow, at some point I'm going to say, maybe I want a different manager.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in here, Mike. Thank you. Thank you for letting me jump in there with you. I want to get to my last question, which is, I want to leave everybody listening with a simple call to action. What is something you've done or tried or seen that didn't take too much time or effort to implement and had kind of an outsized impact on something in the realm of workplace success?
Well, we took a very different approach to how we do performance management, which is not to have a single top-down approach for the whole company, but instead to embed with each leader to give them this type of, best practice and pro tips on how to give feedback. And then to step back and say, you run your performance management cycle the way you think works best for your team. So my call to action for anyone who's listening is, if you've got a top-down, one-size-fits-all performance management system in your company, I'd be concerned that people are putting effort into it and not getting the return from that effort that they would hope for. And that could be because it's not often enough, or because it's not specific enough to the point you made before, or because the people who are running it aren't skilled enough to give quality feedback. It could be a combination of those three things. 3 companies ago, company shall remain nameless, we did a once a year performance review system process, and managers worked on it for like 2 months. And by the time you got to the end of it, it was like, thank God it's over, So if that's how your employees feel about performance management, then it's a huge waste of time. And you should rethink it. You should scrap the whole thing and start over if it's that bad. But more importantly, give managers the free space and empower them to run it the way it makes sense for their team, and give them some standards that they should hold themselves up against that are consistent across the whole company.
Beautifully said. Mike Jacobson, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. It's been a pleasure having you.
Likewise, we should do this more often.
You got it. Sign me up. Have a good one.
You as well. Thanks for having me on the show. It's been great.